You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 269. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you? If you tuned in to last week's episode, you know that we kicked off a two-part series on a topic that is, frankly, quite loaded for those of us with ADHD, and that is the topic of consistency. So we dove into the mindset behind consistency and what it means. We explored how so many of us ADHD brains tend to use the idea of consistency against ourselves. And we talked about the importance of redefining what it means to be consistent or persistent, and doing so intentionally to make that word work for you, to make it feel supportive for you in how you want to show up, so that it feels really aligned with you and your life. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, episode 268, I will link to it in the show notes. I do encourage you to check it out because it really lays the groundwork for what we're going to dive into today. So last week, like I said, we unpacked the idea of consistency, what it means, redefining it, and then also the power of clarifying your goals and your why you want to follow through on this thing, why you want to stick to your definition of consistent. So if you've been thinking about your why and why you want to stick to your particular goals or habits over the past week, you're busy being awesome. Heck yeah. Okay. Today, what we're going to do is take this all a little bit further. Okay, so we're going to shift from mindset into action, because while having a supportive mindset is critical, it is the foundation, it's the action steps that kind of bring everything together. So today, what we're going to do is explore the practical, tactical strategies that can help you reduce that friction in your life and create the habits and the routines and keep returning to the goals regularly. We learn how to make them stick and make it easier to stay persistent or to stay your definition of consistent. So in other words, last week was all about setting the foundation. Today is about building on that foundation with these concrete steps that you can start implementing immediately. So whether you're working toward a new habit or you're sticking with your goals or you're looking for ways to make following these regular rhythms in your life feel like less of an uphill battle, this episode is for you. All right, so let's dive in, and we're going to start by talking about working with your strengths. So as we continue building toward your definition of consistent or persistent, one of the most powerful strategies that you can do is align your tasks and your projects and your habits and goals with your natural strengths and interests. When you can focus on what actually excites you and plays to your strengths, I am telling you, everything becomes so much easier. And not necessarily because the work itself is less challenging. Okay, I'm not saying that the work itself gets easier, but it gets easier because it feels more meaningful, more energizing, because it's something you genuinely care about. Those of us with ADHD, we often thrive when we can find our quote unquote just right level of challenge, or the quote unquote right difficult, as Ned Hallowell talks about in his book ADHD 2.0. I will link to it in the show notes. But when you are engaged in these activities that resonate with you, that challenge you to really keep working at it, your brain is more likely to release dopamine. Remember, dopamine is largely released in the pursuit of something. Okay, so if you are working at something at your just right level of difficulty, your just right level of challenge, it makes continuing to show up for these areas of your life not just manageable, but potentially even enjoyable. Now, does that mean that showing up to these areas won't be hard anymore? Nope. That's not what I'm saying, okay? Because it's literally in the name, your right difficult or your just right level of challenge. But because it is a challenge that is connected to something that you enjoy, that fuels you, okay? That's where it helps you to keep leaning in and keep working toward that end goal. So let's start by thinking about your natural strengths. What are the things that you love to do and that come with relative ease? What are the skills or the talents where you most often get compliments? Maybe you're a natural teacher and you're someone who really excels at breaking down complex ideas into simpler concepts. Or maybe you're a natural entertainer or storyteller and you light up a room with your stories and you make people really feel at ease in your presence. Maybe you are a systems thinker and you're really good at organizing all the different things into a more structured, efficient process. Or maybe you are a super connector and you thrive on building relationships and connecting people to one another and bringing everyone together. Whatever your strengths are, aligning your tasks and your goals with them can be incredibly powerful. But as is always the case with my work, it's not just about an intellectual alignment. We're not just talking about an intellectual yes here. We need to make sure that it is a full body yes. Again, I know I mention this a lot, but there is a reason for it, okay? Checking in and ensuring that what you are doing is a full body yes is critical when it comes to trying to create sustainable habits, to work toward your personal goals, to complete the big projects. And again, I will link to the episode where I first talk about the idea of the full body yes versus the intellectual yes more in depth. But essentially, a full body yes is that feeling that you get when something truly resonates with you. All of you is all in. When you feel aligned, it's not just your mind. You haven't had to work to convince yourself that it's a good idea. Okay? It's the difference between doing something because you think you should, or you've heard a lot of people talking about it, so you think you probably should try it, and something that you genuinely want to do. Or as Mark said in the interview where I was first talking about this content, for reference, if you didn't hear last week's episode, I was interviewed on my Bookkeepers podcast. He asked me to come on and talk about how to be consistent when you're creating content. And the way that he defined it is, it's something that I can't not do. It keeps returning. It keeps coming back. I can't not do it. That would be a full body yes. Okay. So for example, if we think about strengths, I am a natural teacher. I am a lifelong learner. Okay. When I was little, I did not play house. I played school and I gave homework. And I, like I think many of you can relate, am also a lifelong learner. I love learning new things and trying new things and experimenting from different perspectives. So when I put those two together, being a teacher and a lifelong learner, for myself, I found that podcasting was such a natural fit for my business because it allows me to both teach and continue learning and teaching that content in a way that's actionable and you can break down the steps and get started right away. So that is a full body yes to me because it allows me to stay connected to my passion of teaching and learning and sharing that knowledge in digestible ways, actionable ways. And that's what keeps me going, even when things are hard, even if it's something that's vulnerable, even if I'm feeling stuck. But if we contrast that with a intellectual yes or an intellectual should, that's again where your brain is telling you, well, it makes sense. It makes logical sense. We should really probably try that. So for example, all the experts say that I, quote unquote, should be on TikTok for my business because that's where a big community of ADHD brains live. And that would make a lot of sense to be able to get these strategies out to people on TikTok. And you know what? That's probably true. And I tried it for, 6 minutes. And I realized TikTok is not my space. That was a complete intellectual yes. I did try it for more than 6 minutes, maybe 6 days. It was not it. That is not it for me. It is not a full body yes. So I could tell that there was a should behind it, that I should try it. And once I realized, oh, this is not a full body yes, this is not it, I could set it aside because that's not where I want to put my energy. So broadly speaking, When we fill our goals and our schedules and our days with intellectual yeses, with those intellectual shoulds, that's when we tend to find that we're facing a ton of procrastination and burnout because we're forcing ourselves to do things that are not aligned with what we genuinely want to do. So as you're setting your goals, as you're creating your habits, as you're deciding where to focus and which projects to take on, be sure to ask yourself, is this a full body yes? Is there a way to work with my natural strengths so I can smooth out the friction? When you connect with what you're doing and you connect what you're doing with who you are and what you truly want, you are much more likely to show up according to your definition of consistent or persistent because, again, you get to choose. You get to decide what consistent means to you. All right. So working with your strengths is a key component, but it's also just one part of the equation, okay? To also contribute to following through, to meeting your definition of consistent, I think it's also very important to understand your personal rhythms and your preferences when it comes to building habits and following through. So just as we all have unique strengths, we all also have unique rhythms. So these are the times of day, the times of week, times of month when we are more focused. We have a greater capacity to show up in the way that we want to. There are certain types of work that might flow more easily at certain times of day or week or month, even seasonally, okay? And when we can organize our work and our habits and our goals according to those natural rhythms, that can be incredibly supportive. It's another great way to reduce that friction so you can keep showing up with greater ease. Now, of course, as I've just alluded to, there are so many ways that we can think about working with your different rhythms, and maybe we do a whole different podcast episode on that. But today I will give just 2 examples for the sake of time. But if we're thinking about working with your natural rhythms, so you can follow through, so you can meet your definition of consistent, you might play with something like batching your work versus doing some sort of daily or weekly flow. So what do I mean here? Well, some people really thrive on batching different tasks or projects. And this essentially means grouping similar tasks or like items together and doing them all at once. So for example, you might spend an entire day batching several weeks worth of podcast episodes or blog posts, or maybe once a month, you spend an entire afternoon creating freezer meals, okay? Or maybe once a week, you spend a couple of hours responding to your personal inbox of emails. So this approach can be really efficient and quite effective if you have a brain that likes to go all in and really thrives in that hyper-focused flow state for a certain amount of time. And so there might be certain activities, certain projects, certain situations where that can be really supportive. Now, on the other hand, some people find that a daily or a weekly flow works better for them. So instead of batching things and going all in and doing a whole bunch of them all at once, they prefer to kind of spread it out across the week and do a little bit each day or once a week. So maybe if you are writing an article or you have a weekly blog post or something, you do it every week. So every week you have time to write the next week's podcast or blog post or whatever. Or maybe you want to respond to your personal emails more than once a week or something. So every day you have a little bit of time where you like to dip in and check your emails and respond. Or maybe you're somewhere in between. Maybe you don't want to do a whole month worth of freezer meals, but you do like to batch your proteins a week ahead of time, and then you put them into new recipes throughout the week. So this shorter turnaround approach, where you're doing daily or weekly tasks, this can be effective for many brains because it helps you kind of mix up your different tasks so you're not doing the same thing over and over and over, which can give your brain variety and help keep things fresh. So For people who have an easier time with transition and can shift in and out of activities more easily, the daily and the weekly can be quite effective. For people who struggle with transition quite a bit more, if you have a brain more like mine, you all know I struggle with transition a lot, doing that batching approach can often be more effective. But of course, neither approach is better or worse. It's really all about what works for you. In fact, some of you will probably find that this handful of tasks are better for daily or weekly rhythms, while this handful of tasks are better for a batching approach. So as you're thinking about the goal or the habit or the project that you want to stick with for the long haul, as you think about these areas where you want to reach your definition of consistent, I encourage you to experiment and play around with the batching approach and the daily or weekly flow to see what might fit best with your natural rhythms. Again, keeping in mind that your brain might prefer some kind of hybrid approach, which is awesome. Okay. And as the key tip or key reminder, it's so important to simplify your options. Okay. It's really easy to fall into that trap of trying to do everything, taking on too many tasks, too many projects, too many goals all at once. But the truth is, and as we've all probably experienced, when we spread ourselves too thin, we often end up super overwhelmed, unable to keep up, overcommitted, and then dropping the balls, and we're probably beating ourselves up. Okay? So instead, it's so critical and so helpful to focus on one, maybe two things that matter the most to you and really prioritize those tasks that align with your strengths and that feel like a full body yes. When you're able to narrow your focus, you can significantly reduce the mental load. And that makes it so much easier to then meet your definition of being consistent. Okay, you're not just creating a more manageable workflow, you're setting yourself up for success by concentrating your energy on what truly matters the most to you. So yes, we're creating consistent workflows, but they're on the things that truly matter. So whether you're choosing to batch your tasks or you want to spread them out over the weeks, remember that less is more here. So simplify your options, focus on what's going to have the biggest impact, and you're going to find that it's much easier to maintain your definition of consistent, your persistence over time. And of course, if you want support in prioritization and establishing your effective and efficient workflows, let's chat. Whether you're looking for one-on-one support or small group coaching, I have you covered, and you can learn more about both through the links in the show notes. You can sign up for a call for us to hop on Zoom. You'll share where you're at. We'll map out a plan to help you make these things happen. And then we'll talk about what it would look like for us to work together on those goals to see if it's a great fit. All right. So again, you can head to the link in the show notes to learn more about both one-on-one and small group coaching. All right. So after you've created your definition of consistent and you've clarified why you want to do things, then we want to make sure that you're focused on one or two areas and you're simplifying your workflows by honoring your strengths, by recognizing your rhythms so that you're making that regular repetition even easier. All right, so now that we've talked about the importance of simplifying your options and focusing on one or two things that matter most, let's dive into a pretty practical strategy to help you do just that. And that is starting with your cornerstone piece. So when you are trying to meet your definition of consistent and avoid overwhelm, one of the most effective things you can do is identify your cornerstone piece of work or your cornerstone piece of content that's going to really serve as the foundation upon which everything else is built. So this approach not only allows you to focus your energy on what's most important, but it also allows you to maximize your efficiency because you can start repurposing that cornerstone piece across a lot of different platforms. So in last week's episode, I talked about how this was first inspired by creating content. So that's where this language comes from. I'm going to talk about that first because I do know I have a lot of content creators, different coaches, and that sort of thing who listen. And then we're going to talk more about how we can apply this to a lot of different areas of our lives. Okay, so I'm going to first give a content example. When I'm talking about a cornerstone piece, what I mean is a significant piece of content that can be the foundation for your work for the coming week or month or even longer. So for instance, if you are a content creator, if you are in a position, whether you're working for someone else or you're working for yourself, or you have to write content, your cornerstone piece might be a blog post or a podcast episode or a YouTube video. So the idea here is that this piece of content is substantial enough that you can then take that main piece and break it down into smaller pieces to repurpose them. So for example, if you start with a podcast episode, you could then pull out key points to use as social media posts or a blog post summary or a mini video series, or you could write a newsletter from it. Okay? These are all things that I've done, by the way. Same thing if you are a blogger and you have this really comprehensive blog post, which you could then turn into social posts or a series of emails, some sort of email sequence, a downloadable guide, what have you. So this way, you're not only getting the most out of your work, but also you're ensuring this consistent messaging across your different platforms and helping to ensure that you're reaching people with different learning styles in different places where they tend to hang out without having to start from scratch each time. It's so much more supportive for our brains, okay? Because this approach does essentially three things. First of all, it ensures that your main focus is something that truly matters, has a significant impact. You're putting your energy into what actually moves the needle the most, which sets the stage for everything else. Okay, so you're choosing something that has some bigger reason behind it. There's a message behind it that you want to send. Second, it reduces the pressure to constantly come up with new content or tasks from scratch, which can be a major source of overwhelm for us ADHD brains. And here's where the real efficiency comes in, because if you've already done the heavy lifting with your cornerstone piece, it's not such a lift to do those other things because you're building upon it. So whether it's creating additional content or completing related tasks or expanding on that first habit that you started, it all feels more manageable because you've laid that strong foundation. And then, like I said, the best part is that it's not just for content creation. That's just where I kind of first played with it. The idea actually expands to all different areas of your life. So let's talk about some different examples. Let's start with some sort of personal goal. Okay, let's say you have a goal to improve your physical health generally. Okay, that's kind of a broad goal. We would want to get more specific about what that means for you. But let's say you've done that, okay, and you have specific goals around the 3 M's, let's call it that: movement, mindset, meals. Okay, you have goals around those. So maybe a cornerstone piece would be establishing and following your definition of a consistent morning routine that touches on that first M of movement. Okay, so maybe it's an outside walk or put on a video or something and you lift some weights. The idea is that a morning routine becomes that anchor for your day. And it sets the tone. It gives you a sense of accomplishment right away. It releases the dopamine right from the get-go, sets you up for success to then check in with your mindset and your meals throughout the rest of the day. So you kind of built that cornerstone and then the rest can go from there. And once you've established that cornerstone habit or that cornerstone routine, you can build upon it. You might incorporate other related habits into that very morning routine, or maybe you bring it in later in the day. So if it's in the morning routine, maybe you lift in the mornings 4 days a week or something. And then after that, you focus on your meal, which has more protein in it. Okay. Or you set aside some mindset time to do some self-coaching. Or maybe you start with your morning movement. We have a whole bunch of alliteration happening. You start with your morning movement and then you build upon that later in the day. Okay, it doesn't all have to happen in the morning. Maybe you are focused on your meals later on and you have a mindset thing at the end of the workday, whatever. You get to choose what it means for you. The key is starting with that one cornerstone piece. And then you create a ripple effect that makes it easier to add on the other habits that support that overarching goal. Let's talk about another area. Let's talk about a home project. Okay, let's say you've been wanting to declutter and get organized for quite some time, but thinking about the whole house just makes your brain want to melt. Okay, a good cornerstone could be tackling just one room or one specific area and maintaining that level of clutter for a while. Okay, so let's say you declutter your kitchen counters. And by focusing on this area first, you make significant progress without feeling like you need to declutter the whole house at once. You've noticed that going into your kitchen first thing in the morning, you have this wash of overwhelm because you don't have counter space to make breakfast or whatever. So you decide, all right, what I'm going to do first is clear the counters, and I'm going to develop a system that allows me to maintain what Dana K. White talks about as your clutter threshold, whatever that level is. And I'll link to her book as well. This will be a link-heavy episode. But you first clarify for yourself what your clutter threshold is just for your kitchen counters, and you maintain that. You establish your workflows. You establish your systems that allow you to do that so that when you come to your kitchen anytime, you feel more grounded and clear, and you can easily do what you came into the kitchen to do, like make a sandwich or prepare dinner or whatever. Okay, that is a cornerstone habit upon which you can build if you want to. Once your kitchen counters are clear, you might use that as momentum to tackle the next area. And you might repurpose some of the strategies that did work for you for maintaining your counter spaces and moving to another part of the house. Maybe you found that sorting the different items on your counters into different bins of keep, donate, and discard was really effective. So now you bring that into the family room. Or maybe you first started with finding homes for the homeless things. Like, where do these things belong? Let's find a home for them. And that was really effective for the kitchen counters. And now everything in the kitchen counter area has a home. And now what would it look like to do that somewhere else? You can build on that cornerstone habit. And starting here allows you to build up that confidence, show your brain that you are following through. You can see the progress. And eventually that makes it easier to stay with your definition of consistent over the long haul as you spread outward to the other areas of your home too. Okay, now let's talk about a couple of different work examples. So maybe the first area where you establish some sort of cornerstone is managing your weekly meetings or something. Okay, maybe you're in a corporate situation and your cornerstone piece is preparing an agenda for a weekly team meeting. So instead of looking at all the emails and all the different projects that are going on and feeling overwhelmed as you're thinking about having to touch on all of these different things, instead, you start by getting a clear, concise agenda that outlines the key topics you know you want to cover that week. What matters most about this meeting this week? What do you want to cover? What do you want to talk about? And then this agenda becomes your cornerstone. It sets the stage for the entire meeting, ensuring that everyone's on the same page. They can add in their 2 cents. They know where their parts are. They know where they need to present or whatever. So once the agenda is set, you can essentially build upon it by assigning those tasks, scheduling follow-ups, documenting decisions and whatever during the meeting. When you focus first on the cornerstone piece, you streamline the meeting preparation and the entire process. And it makes it so much easier to stay consistent with that weekly check-in of team communication. Plus, it reduces the mental load because you're not trying to hold it all in your head again, which is what we tend to try and do. And it's exhausting for the executive functions because our working memory really struggles, at least many of ours. All right, so the second area, where else might you use this in a work situation? Where could you have some sort of cornerstone content? Maybe it's around streamlining your communication. Maybe you're in some sort of client-facing or support role, so you answer a lot of questions, you respond to tickets, you do a lot of customer service type work. Maybe your cornerstone piece is creating several standard email templates for the different types of updates and replies and questions that you get. So that way, when you open your inbox every day, instead of your brain going, oh my gosh, there's so much, and you feel super overwhelmed and you need to personalize and rewrite every single email communication, you instead have a handful of templates that give you a place to start, that cover the most basic information. And then that template or those templates become your cornerstone piece. And that saves you so much time ensuring that you can regularly show up according to your level of consistent because you've reduced the lift. You don't have to have such a heavy lift of starting from scratch every time. You have those templates and you can easily customize them for the different inquiries, the different clients. You can add specific details, send updates, so much easier, right? It makes it much easier to maintain your regular communication without getting bogged down in writing everything from scratch. And then finally, okay, this brings us to the third area that I think is really critical when it comes to meeting your definition of consistent or persistent. I think it's so key when it comes to following through and showing up for what you want to do. And it's the idea of time budgeting. Okay, I am telling you, this exercise is so eye-opening. It's so impactful when I do it with my clients. And I highly encourage you to play around with it as well. So I know that budgeting in and of itself is kind of a loaded word. Sometimes if you have a brain like mine that doesn't love numbers so much, I was a musician, I count to 8, sometimes 16. Other than that, numbers are not my forte. Okay, now my brain wants to go into a pun about forte. All of you musicians, you may be laughing. Thank you. Everyone else, sorry. Okay, so budgeting can be one of those things that makes our brain want to melt if you have a brain like mine. Some of you are really great with numbers. That's amazing, and I love that for you. But budgets in and of themselves, they sound like it's a bunch of spreadsheets and numbers, and that can feel kind of overwhelming or boring, or you're not quite sure how that's going to help you follow through. Okay. But I'm telling you, creating a time budget is a game changer. So what exactly is this? At its core, time budgeting is all about being really intentional with how you allocate your time each day and each week. Sometimes even each month. I have some clients who like to create a whole month budget. So just like you would create a budget for your groceries or your essentials, okay, rent, groceries, retirement, fun, how much are you setting aside each week, each month, whatever it is. A time budget similarly helps ensure that you are setting aside enough time for the things that matter the most to you, whether that's work, self-care, hobbies, spending time with your friends, with your loved ones. Your time budget allows you to prioritize what matters most. It helps ensure that your priorities are reflected in how you spend the bulk of your day. So the math is this. We all have 168 hours in a week, okay? No more, no less. We all have 168 hours. And how we choose to spend those hours and how we choose to think about that time each day and each week can make an incredible difference in whether we're feeling super overwhelmed and stretched thin or well-resourced and productive. So let's break this down a little bit, okay? We first want to start by thinking about the non-negotiables in your life, the things that you absolutely want to do each week. Your brain might think of them as needs. You have to do these, okay? So these might mean work, sleep, eating, any other regular commitments you've made, taking care of your kids, whatever, pets. So let's say you work a full-time job, okay? Typically that's about 40 hours. And then we have a commute, however far that is, unless you work from home. Then you also need sleep. Let's say you're getting 8 hours. That's 56 hours of that 168 gone. And then eating meals and commuting to other places, daily essentials. You'll find that when you start adding all these things up, it's a significant chunk of that 168 hours, okay? But there's also often more time, okay? After your non-negotiables are accounted for, after you've accounted for them, you often have some hours left over that you can intentionally allocate to those other areas of your life. Hobbies, self-care, spending time with friends, family, your side hustle, whatever. Okay. And this is where the real magic of the time budget happens, because when you intentionally decide how you want to use these remaining hours, you can make sure that your time aligns with those priorities. So for example, if you are building a side business, but it always stays as, I think it's Jody Moore who calls it a jobby, right? Where you just never really build the business any further because you can't seem to find time for it. So it just remains this jobby. That's where time budgeting can really help. When you're setting aside a specific set of blocks each week, 30 minutes after work, a few hours on the weekend, whatever it is, you're creating this dedicated space that actively fits in your schedule. And here's the thing, okay? If we don't intentionally set aside that time, it likely won't happen, especially if it's a challenge, if it's something that asks us to step outside of our comfort zone, if it's asking us to grow or do something new, we're probably not going to make time for it. And for a lot of you listening who struggle to say no to other people and struggle to prioritize things you want, it's also very challenging to honor those things if they are for you. Okay, life gets busy. And it's so easy for those things that truly matter to us to get pushed to the back burner unless we're really intentional about creating time in our time budget for them. So this budgeting really helps us to set aside that time. And it also allows you to be so much more realistic about your commitments. Instead of trying to cram so many different things into your week, you can see in black and white numbers how much time you actually have to play with. And this can help you make those better decisions about what to say yes to and what to let go of and to reduce the risk of burnout. Okay, if we go back to that 168-hour framework, once you've accounted for those non-negotiables and the things that really matter to you, take a look at what's left. Do you have time for everything that you want to do? If not, that's a sign that we want to reassess. We want to make some adjustments. Maybe you want to cut back on something that's not as important, that's not a priority, that's not values aligned. Or maybe we want to get more creative about how we're spending our time. Where can we parallel task with catching up on some podcast episodes while you're putting away laundry or walking the dog? Maybe some of you are doing that right now. Where can we delegate? Where can we outsource certain tasks to free up more time to do what matters most? Remember, the goal of time budgeting is to help you intentionally spend your time in the way you want to. And also, it's not to fill up every minute of the week with tasks and activities. Okay? I know many of you will want to create this perfectly time-blocked schedule where every minute is full. That is not reality. That is robot. Okay? We are humans, so we also need white space. We need rest. We need relaxation. We need transition time. Okay? We can't just switch from one type of work project immediately into swimming lessons for your child. You have to get home and then to the swimming lessons, right? We need this transition time. We tend to forget about it. Okay? So make sure that we're allowing that downtime for rest, relaxation, so we can transition. Because the truth is, and I know you've probably heard me say this over and over, I'm going to keep saying it over and over, your brain is going to rest one way or another. Okay? And that's because you're a human. I'm sorry to break this to you. You're not a robot. You are a human, which means you need rest. And if you don't plan to rest, if you don't do that with intention, your brain is going to rest without your permission. And it's probably going to do it at an inopportune time when your toddler brain throws a tantrum until it gets what it wants. Okay? The challenge here is that when we do this without intention, when the toddler brain just throws a tantrum, so we end up procrastinating or doing something else, scrolling Instagram for hours, what we do is we end up burning ourselves out because we're constantly shoulding ourselves. We're thinking, oh, I should be working. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm always wasting my time. And we never actually allow ourselves to fully unplug and recharge because we're always shoulding in the background that we should be working. And so that's why we want to intentionally create the downtime so that we can intentionally show up during that work time. Okay, so that's the last core strategy that I'm going to share, at least for this episode, because I know it's getting long. But the last key strategy when we are laying the foundation for meeting your definition of consistent. We want to clarify the time budget, identify your non-negotiables, allocate the time for the things that matter most to you. And as you do, make sure that you're also creating downtime and rest. Remember, this is your time. You get to decide how you use it in a way that supports you and your goals and your well-being and your overall happiness. And by being intentional with that time and setting aside dedicated blocks for the things that truly matter, you're not only making sure that they happen, but you're also creating that life that feels intentional and fulfilling and aligned with who you are and what you truly want in this season. All right, so as we wrap up today's episode, part 2 of this 2-part series, let's take a moment to recap the key tactical strategies that we talked about so you can meet your definition of consistent or persistent in whatever it is that you're working toward. So first, we talked about the importance of working with your strengths and recognizing your rhythms, recognizing when you're at your best and aligning your tasks and your projects and your habits with those strengths, with those natural ebbs and flows. So whether you thrive on batching projects and tasks, or you prefer a daily flow or a weekly flow, understanding your rhythms and aligning them with your strengths helps you to work in a way that feels natural and sustainable. Then we talked about the power of starting with your cornerstone piece. By focusing on that one project, that one task that can really move the needle the most, you create a strong foundation that makes everything else easier to manage. This strategy is all about efficiency, okay? It's all about putting your energy where it makes the biggest difference and then building on that foundation to maintain your definition of consistent with less effort. And then finally, we explored the concept of creating your time budget, using the 168 hours that we have each week and doing so intentionally so that you're allocating your time to where you want to spend it each week. By setting aside those dedicated blocks of time for you, for your cornerstone piece, and any of the other non-negotiables, you're ensuring that what matters most actually gets done. And you're doing so in a way that works for your brain. Because if we don't set aside that time, it is all too easy to let the demands of everything else crowd out our priorities and goals. Remember, persistence, your definition of consistent, it's built one step at a time. It's not about doing everything perfectly all at once. It is a willingness to keep coming back. Even when your brain tells you, oh, you fell off track, fell off the wagon. No brain, there's no wagon anywhere in sight, okay? It's all about willing to come back, learning from what worked, learning from what didn't, and continuing to take that meaningful step forward, those meaningful actions that align with your strengths and with your values. Whether it's a personal goal or a home project or something at work, these strategies can all help you to stay on track without feeling super overwhelmed. So as you go about your week, I encourage you to take these strategies to apply them to your own life, your own goals, your own habits. Think about your rhythms, think about your cornerstone piece, and budget your time in a way that allows you to show up for those things that matter most to you. And again, if you want support in this area, if you want someone to walk alongside you and help you strategize and figure out the supports and the approaches that work the best for your brain and to help you meet your level of consistent, this is what I do, okay? I have got you. So whether you're looking for one-on-one support or small group support, check out the links in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/coaching. You can sign up for a time for us to chat. I would love it to support you in working with your ADHD brain to start living that intentional life that you know is waiting for you. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And I'm curious, have you downloaded my free ebook called 10 Tips to Work with Your ADHD Brain? It has some of my favorite strategies all in one place to help you take those steps to build your unique ADHD toolkit. You can grab it now through the link in the show notes and start taking action today. Also, do you know someone who tends to use the idea of consistent against themselves, or who wants to follow through more often in a way that feels great for their brain? If so, would you be a rock star and share this episode with them? You could send it in a text message or take a screenshot and share it on your stories. If you do, make sure to tag me so I can give you a shout out. And please know that I so appreciate your support in helping me get these strategies to even more ADHD brains who need them. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.